Azul just launched a free JVM vulnerability risk assessment. Before we get into what it is, what it does, can you help us understand the threat landscape that you are responding to, specifically how autonomous AI changes the urgency around Java runtime security?
Yes, I mean, as we've seen, the growth of AI and how much it's being used has really kind of just taken everybody by surprise. I think that's fair to say. And we've seen over the last few months that the idea of cybersecurity has become very, very relevant, because if you look at Anthropic, who are one of the big companies behind the AI models, they announced what they called Mythos, and Mythos was a new model for them, which they had determined had very powerful cybersecurity detection, vulnerability detection, and also exploit capabilities. And so they actually have kept it fairly under wraps, and there's been a lot of issues around the American government deciding that they don't want people to access it and various things like that I won't go into. But essentially the model that they've created now has capabilities which allows it to look at software and find vulnerabilities that haven't been found before, and do it in such a way that we can find many more than we had before. If you look at some of the statistics, I think one of the oldest vulnerabilities that it detected in an open source piece of software was like 27 years old. So the code that was responsible for that was like 27 years old, and that vulnerability hadn't been detected in all that time. But it's in terms of the impact, it is huge, because we can look at the fact that, again, from what Anthropic have said, because they're keeping it under wraps, they have this thing called Project Glasswing, they're keeping it under wraps, but they have said that they've basically detected vulnerabilities in every operating system, every web browser that they pointed it at, all the sort of commonly used pieces of software. Now, Java, from that perspective, is also a very commonly used piece of software. And again, to sort of give you some idea of how important it is from a Java security perspective, one sort of data point, if you like, which is not specific to the Java runtime, but if we look at the libraries which also sit on top of Java, there's an interesting statistic that I saw related to another language model, so not actually Mythos, but somebody used another one. And again, this is why it's very important, because even today I've seen announcements about OpenAI. They've announced GPT 5.5 Cyber, so it's not just about Mythos, it's about other models catching up. And specifically, the article that I read said that they had pointed the model that they were using at certain things which were known vulnerabilities and ones that have been exploited in the past. And the one that kind of caught my eye was one that we've seen a few years ago, which was Log4Shell, based on the Log4j library. And they basically took the model and they said, right, pointed at Log4j, which was the library, but without the information that had been published about the vulnerability. So it didn't have any prior knowledge of that. And it went and it tried to see whether it could determine a vulnerability and whether it could create an exploit. And it did. Okay, so that's very concerning. What's even more concerning is the fact that it took 18 minutes and 53 seconds to do that. So from pointing it at a piece of software to having a usable exploit, 18 minutes and 53 seconds. So what is important is understanding that the threat landscape is changing. It's changing a lot in terms of the perspective of thinking that we are going to see quite a lot of vulnerabilities being identified and having to be patched over, I would say, the next year, 18 months, maybe 2, even longer years. And that's going to be very important, is understanding that new threat landscape and what are the priorities when it comes to patching the critical software that you've got running in your estate.